Yo, what's up? Welcome back, guys. This is going to be the second video in a series of video tutorials that I'm doing. Now, the last time we got to spend some quality time together, we took a look at sidechaining in beginner, intermediate, and pro level formats. This video will switch gears a little bit, and that will be looking at an individual plugin and how I use it to make music. And to kick things off, we're going to be looking at something that has a lot of utility. It's something I use in the kick making process itself and in the live track. We're going to be looking at Nimble Kick. Nimble Kick is a fantastic tool for creating kicks, modifying, editing them, doing crazy things with them live that you can only really do with certain types of algorithms. I'll show you how you can take some very simple sounds and bring them into this plugin, switch them up a little bit, and create something totally new. This will be somewhat of a kick making tutorial, somewhat of a VST breakdown itself into Nimble Kick, and yeah, let's get into it. All right, guys, here it is. This is what Nimble Kick looks like when you load it up. There's some very self-explanatory things on here, but of course we'll be diving in and going over all of the features of Nimble Kick. I did just update the other day, so as of the time of this recording, the current version is 1.2.3, and I'll be leaving a link to where you can purchase Nimble Kick for yourself in the description of this video. So right at the top, you can see it starts with drag and drop a sample here, and it really is as simple as that. Find your favorite kick. It can be a finished kick, a half finished kick, really anything you want. And you'll start to see what we're going to be able to do with these sounds in just a moment. So give me just a second. I'm going to find a kick drum that I want to drag in here, and we'll start playing around with some of these knobs. All right. So as you can see, I have found from the ops pack this mid-intro reverse bass kick in the note of F. And since Nimble Kick is an instrument, it does need to be triggered by MIDI. So if you just take a peek behind here, very simple quarter note on F playing behind the instrument here. And yeah, this is what it sounds like, just dragging a kick in and having it play. Sick. So the first thing to note is the root note feature here. Whenever you drag a kick in, Nimble Kick does a pretty good job of determining what the key of that kick is and will automatically set this knob. However, every now and then it can get it wrong. For example, it did get it wrong when I dragged this kick in. It thought it was in G, but had the knob up here. So I just simply corrected it to F. The next thing I want to show you guys is how Nimble Kick splits the punch and the tail of a kick, so that we can apply different effects to those different parts. If you take a look here, this red line, you can actually move it around. Very easy. Back in the day, for what we would call new style kicks, a lot of the times the punches were a lot shorter, the talks were a lot shorter, and you would have the split between the punch and the tail usually happen a lot sooner. Now, that's not to say that you can't still have that, and people certainly do, but having this sort of flexibility to be able to tell Nimble Kick where the punch and the tail begin and end can actually lend itself to some really creative things, and we'll show you what that looks like here. So I'm actually going to tell Nimble Kick that the punch ends and the tail begins right here, which if I play this back again, you can see it's just about halfway through the kick. Now to cover some of the basics, the pitching algorithm that it uses, I always just leave it on stereo time machine here. It is a proprietary stretching algorithm. It sounds great. I've tried the other ones. They don't sound as great. So I would recommend just keeping it on time machine for now. The range, somewhat arbitrary. It basically limits the number of notes that you can go up and down. Usually people aren't pitching their kicks more than an octave up like this. So just leaving on this default is fine unless you really are trying to get some crazy numbers out of this. And the number of voices, you pretty much always want that at 1. You don't really want to be playing 2 kicks at the same time if you can avoid it. So I would recommend keeping that at 1. Now, another thing I really wanted to cover is, of course, one of its biggest features, Pogo. Pogo, if you're familiar with FL Studio, is a way of pitching a sample so that it follows an envelope either up and down or down and up really quickly, and was really popularized by Malice and Ruler and the Gearbox guys back in the day. And so Nimble Kick has done a really great job faithfully replicating how Pogo works and being able to put it on a knob in a plugin for the rest of us to use. Now, just briefly, we're going to cover what Pogo does and what it sounds like. We're going to cover a little bit of just using it as is, and then we'll show you what it does when you're using punch only. So I'm going to play this back and we'll check out Pogo. Pretty interesting there. Obviously, you're going to have a ton of mixed results depending on the type of kick you use, what settings you use, where your punch and tail are split, and how it pogos. Now we'll take a look at what it sounds like when you're only pogoing the punch. And by punch, it means everything before this red line. All right, now I'm going to run it back again, still only pogoing the punch only, but this time I'm going to change where I'm telling Nimble Kick the punch actually ends. And you can see how that affects where the pogo actually goes. Obviously, again, mixed results there, but you can have a lot of fun with this and get really creative. Now, I'm going to turn off punch only and go back to using Pogo across the entire kick. Now, keep in mind, this will change effectively the root note of the kick. So some tuning afterwards may be necessary, or just reclassifying what note the kick is actually in. Let's say even in the file name, if you determined it to be, for the most part, another note up or down, you may just want to rename the file once you've actually finished a kick. But another thing I want to start looking at, in addition to using Pogo, is this stretch knob here. Now, the stretch will work in tandem with Pogo to sort of eliminate any artifacts that may come up. As you heard, we had some artifacts earlier when we were trying to Pogo the kick, and you can stretch the kick out in ways that will work well with the Pogo. And we'll take a listen to what that sounds like here. As you can hear, there's a ton of different slight variations and results that you can get out of something like this. You could move this stretch knob 5 times and make 5 different kicks that are all on brand, so to speak, for a particular style, and it works really well. Now, I've moved the settings back to essentially default so that we could take a look at some of the other features that Nimble Kick offers here. There is an equalizer that is pretty warm. It's a subtle equalizer. It does gain stage throughout the plugin, so at the end of the day, it is part of the signal flow. It's being compressed into what the final output signal is. So you don't have to worry too much about how aggressive you are with your EQing. If you click right here, you can see currently the EQ is affecting the punch, which again is everything before this red line. But if you click here, it switches to the tail EQ, which allows us to EQ everything that is after the red line. So again, we'll play it back. I'll move some stuff around and you can hear how it's affecting the sounds. Pretty cool. Now, the only limiting factor is you do only get the 3-pole EQ here. You've got your low shelf, your high shelf, and a simple bell that you can move up and down. You're not actually able to change the Q shape of this either. So it is one of the limiting factors of the EQ internally here, but still the fact that they offer it and that it sounds so well put together with the rest of the plugin, I still really enjoy having this feature. The next thing we'll take a look at here is the kick effects section. Now, this section can get pretty crazy pretty fast, so I would recommend going a little bit light at first. As you can see, by default, it does set it as a peak filter with about 50% drive mix, I guess you would call it. But yeah, as you move this around on the XY graph, you can kind of see what type of kick effects you can get. Change the filter shape. So as you can see, we started playing around with a couple of different features that we've already talked about all in one go. And you can see just the endless possibilities of the types of kicks you can create for your tracks out of just one kick. Let's say you spent a ton of time building that one kick for yourself and you really just wanted a ton of different varieties of that same kick. Nimble Kick is the plugin that you'd want to use. And what I've showed you so far are the basics of what Nimble Kick does the best. There are some other features, as you can tell down at the bottom. Punch reverb, I don't particularly like this feature. I will be completely honest. It doesn't sound great. There's no control over the shape of the reverb itself. I wouldn't recommend using it. But that being said, it's just one small blip on an incredible plugin for creativity. There's also the transient shaping, a compressor, balance between the punch and the tail in terms of the gain. I'll be showing you some of this in a few moments when we look at how I would use Nimble Kick myself to both create a kick and how I would use it in a track. And I'll show you some of those features coming up. And now I'd like to show you how I use Nimble Kick creatively in the kick making process, as well as how I would use Nimble Kick in a live environment in the track itself. So what I'll be demonstrating is how I simply took this kick sample and turned it into this. Just using Nimble Kick. So as you can see, I've loaded in that kick sample to Nimble Kick. I've turned off a number of the features here so that I can kind of go through them one by one and show you what I did with it and how it's affecting the sound. So to start, this is what it sounds like. Very typical hardstyle. So the first thing I did was I went into Pogo and played around for a little bit and decided on -100 to start with. Now I know that sounds ridiculous, but stick with me. So I'll be turning on the equalizer as well. And you can see what I've done with the punch equalizer. Scooped out a lot of that muddy mid-range, really boosted the low end, really boosted the high end. And on the tail side, we've really boosted that sub bass area to get a cool sound out of it. So you'll see what it sounds like when I turn the equalizer on. Now we're getting something that sounds really cool. The next thing I did was played around with the kick effects section. As you can see here, I didn't scientifically end up on this number. It just, to me, sounded really good to my ears. We have a low pass shape selected. I've brought down the mix to roughly about 40% and am boosting 40 dB at 108 Hertz. When I turn on this kick effects, you'll hear what it sounds like. Starting to sound worse maybe, but again, stick with me here because I've also adjusted some things with the transient and the punch balance as well. For the transient section, I'm going to turn this on. And what you'll see is that it adds a yellow line here. This is essentially me telling Nimble Kick not only where the punch is with our red line, but this yellow line determines some curves that I can adjust with either increasing or decreasing gain, adjusting the shape of these curves like this. Just going to put that back where it goes. Yeah, and so what I've done is essentially pull down during this shape. I'm pulling down -17. So I'll play this back. Getting rid of that sort of nasty start to the beginning of the sound and making some more room. In addition to that, I've also decreased this punch gain by about 30 dB. And as you can see here, there's almost nothing there. There still is a little bit of sound there, but now we've really took the punch out of this kick. And we're left with a really nasty, grimy tail that could sound really good given some processing. Now, if I move this aside here, you can tell that I've had this soloed for now. The idea behind taking out this punch was so that I could make room for putting another punch that I had already made before in. So if we go to this channel and we solo this group, I'll solo the punch. We'll close Nimble Kick for now. I have a punch channel here that I was just kind of messing around with, turning a bit crusher on and off. But really this channel was to have a punch and for it to have reverb. So this is what the punch sounds like. And if you remember from the last tutorial video, I'm using a little bit of that reverb sidechain technique that I showed previously to get that pumping reverb effect from the punch. Because without it, it just doesn't have that space. So I made the room for the punch in Nimble Kick itself. I have my punch layer here with some reverb, and I have those two channels in a group and ended up with a kick sounding kind of like this. Not bad, especially if you're first starting out and you make something like that. I would think that you're going to be pretty proud of yourself, and you should be. But I wanted a little bit more processing out of this. I wanted to squish it together a little bit more, make something even more unique. And so I decided to bounce that channel down and start to process it a little bit more. If I come over here, this was the initial bounce of that channel. Sounds pretty good. I did crush it a little bit with this plugin called Punch. And yeah. Just clipping off some of the aggressive low end there and kind of smashing the kick down. And again, I bounced that down. And we had a nice square kick. So, moving on to the final product. I increased the complexity of the MIDI a little bit. As we discussed earlier, Nimble Kick is an instrument. You can play it like an instrument. So I made a couple of kick rolls here, nothing too crazy. Something I did want to mention that I did forget to mention earlier is the separate tail feature. Now, this is an important creative decision for you. When separate tail is checked, what this will do is when you play different notes, it's going to pitch just the tail to those notes. The punch will stay the same note. But if separate tail is unchecked, then the entire kick will pitch itself as you play different notes. And for this example, I wanted that to happen to get a certain sound. And so that's why I have it unchecked there. Now, I took that finished kick that we had already bounced down from Nimble earlier and put it back into Nimble. And this is what it looked like. I decided to separate the punch and the tail right about here. Now you can also see I've done a little bit more work on the EQ, a little bit more subtle work than previously when I was making the kick. This is just a little bit of corrective EQing to get just a little bit more character out of the kick and out of the sound. I've also pogoed the entire kick -15 and applied some kick effects, not very much at all, 1.4 dB, peak distortion at 392 Hz. Now, I know this still sounds a little bit different than the final product that I showed you a few minutes ago, and that is true because we can't get it all done in a one-stop shop like Nimble. I did have to go the extra mile to get some sounds that I wanted. So I took from the Ops pack some attack sounds. That's playing in the background. This does say A sharp, however, I did pitch it down -5 to sit in that F area. I've also added a gated reverb from that same pack as well. So we can hear what the kick sounds like without those things and then with them. The attack's added. And now the reverb. It just adds that clarity. The transient is nice and bright now. The reverb adds that additional space that may have been lacking after all of the initial processing from the original punch. Now, as a final step for this kick project, I added FabFilter's Saturn to the group, and the group being Nimble Kick itself, the transient, and the reverb. In FabFilter Saturn, I found a preset called Crispy Fats 2. Modified it a little bit. It didn't sound great at first, but it did have some things that I really liked about how it was splitting these bands up and the types of distortion it was applying to each one. Got some warm tube in there, gentle saturation up top, heavy saturation up top. It just made a really cool sound. I did have to bring down some of the presence as it was a little bit too crispy for a kick drum. But yeah, I'll play this kick back and turn the final bit of saturation on, and you can see essentially how this kick was transformed into the final product. Pretty sick. And I also threw in some hats for good measure. And there you have it, guys. That is Nimble Kick. It is very versatile. You can use it in the live track environment to make kick effects and kick rolls. You can take kicks that are fully completed and processed, or you can take very basic sounds and throw them into Nimble and get endless possibilities. If you would like to know more about how to use Nimble and some other cool ways that I have implemented it into tracks before, please feel free to start the discussion in the Discord. Once again, I will leave a link in the description to purchase Nimble Kick. It is about $20, but it is entirely worth the money. And that is all I have for you this week on the VST Breakdown series. Thanks again for being a patron, and we'll see you on the next one.